This is IAM Talking, an ongoing interview-based series by Information Architected in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Your host is Dan Keldsen, Chief Innovation Officer at Information Architected. You can find out more about the consulting, speaking, and workshop services provided by Information Architected around innovation management, social business design, content management, knowledge management, Enterprise 2.0, and enterprise search at informationarchitected.com. Ready to go? And now, on to the interview.
Today, I am talking about managing influence, cycles, tables, plays, and players with Alan Kelly, CEO and founder of Playmaker Systems. Go to playmakersystems.com for more info. He also is the author of The Elements of Influence, which is how I first came to know about Alan and his company's work several years ago. I've come to find in my conversations with Alan, both privately and in this interview, that the science and practice of influence continues to unfold, and we, all of us, are lucky enough to have some people, such as Alan and his team, or Dr. Cialdini, or many others, a growing army, have dedicated decades of their lives to providing structures and language to understand what makes influence work, how we are being influenced, how we can better influence others, and on and on. We'll cover some examples of influence plays being run in modern day, whether it's Apple and Microsoft, or Samsung and Apple, or even Donald Trump and President Obama very recently. Ready to learn more about the language of influence plays? Here we go. Thanks for joining me today, Alan. Great to have you involved in our ongoing interview series. I'm looking forward to this.
Thanks, Dan. Hi.
So the topic today is managing influence, cycles, tables, plays, and players, which we'll explain shortly. And my guest, Alan Kelly, is the CEO of Playmaker Systems. Are you in Maryland, Virginia? Where are you?
We're based in Bethesda, in Maryland.
Okay. I first became familiar with Alan through his book, The Elements of Influence, which was published in 2006. That seems like a long time ago, doesn't it?
It does.
A world has changed. And he's been an influence practitioner, as the superset of influences is called, in one shape or another for, well, let's see, you mentioned before when we were talking previously, you got involved in high-tech PR in the 80s? When did you get started?
In the early 80s, I came to Silicon Valley without knowing a bit from a byte.
Okay.
I graduated, undergraduate a few years earlier. I had come from the air cargo industry.
Oh.
But somebody gave me a job in Silicon Valley, and I thought it would be an interesting place to go. And it was. It worked out real well for me, and I put in some graduate work in the interim there. Basically, I'm sort of professionally born and bred from Silicon Valley and have watched a lot of cycles, a lot of phases and generations of computing come and go.
Yeah, no kidding. And every day, technology is perhaps moving a bit too fast these days, but that's a different topic, I think.
Yes, it is.
Okay. Well, so as I mentioned to you before when we were talking a couple of weeks ago, it was kismet. It was an accident. I don't know what it was, but I stumbled onto your book. It happened to be out in the now no longer existing Borders bookstore down in the financial district in Boston. And it was just out in their outside book rack amongst completely random other topics. I don't know why it was there.
Begging to be read.
Yeah, it literally was. And, it actually leapt out at me, as you saw when I had the camera turned on. I have a lot of books that I read. I do a lot of research, and I try to apply it as much as possible. What leapt out to me was, one, I'm very interested in influence, and I wouldn't say that I'm a natural influencer. So anything that helps me to understand the science of influence rather than relying on art and DNA, I'm very interested in. And then two, the title caught my eye because I'm the son of a chemist. So I grew up with a periodic table literally all over the house, doing science experiments at the kitchen table. And even though I didn't pursue chemistry and I'm not a traditional scientist, I really like what the periodic table of elements does for things. So I love the title, and it makes a whole lot of sense to me. Why is this necessary? Why do we need a periodic table of elements for influence?
I don't know how we can do without it. Most every craft or practice which has evolved into a profession or a full-blown discipline has had the benefit and has been vaulted ahead by good ontologies, good systems, good classifications, good taxonomies, frameworks that help them to understand the irreducibly unique componentry of their business or of their science. Obviously, for you and your family, it was the periodic table of chemical elements. I'm the son of a cell biologist, so for me, it was domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. It was the phylogenetic tree, and I suppose from my friend down the block whose father was an accountant, then maybe it was credits and debits.
Right.
But in the businesses of, I come from the marketing and the communications businesses, but in the allied fields of advertising, of sales, of public affairs, of lobbying, even of military information warfare, it is very clear that people in the professionals or paraprofessionals, if you will, operating in those fields, they don't know what their units of practice are.
Right.
There's a lot of discussion lately about reputation and how much that matters. There has been discussion for years about the merits of relationships. Some people want to talk about trust. People want to talk about triggering values. And those are all fine. But those are not reducible or reduced concepts. And so what fascinates me is this idea that a system which is common to any form of influence, irrespective of culture or region or mores or laws, might be able to be carved out of the hillside and dusted off.
Right.
It's sort of a piece of social archaeology, I guess, and it could be defined. And that's what I've spent my last 7-8 years working on. It's frankly what I've bet my career on as well. I am hopelessly interested in this topic.
Well, I think that's a bad thing. I describe myself as infinitely curious, and sometimes I feel like I'm ripped into a million pieces, and sometimes it feels like one nice, solid piece that I'm interested in.
Good. Well, this is the kind of thing which I think can help people feel more like they're in one piece, because the pastimes or the practice of a salesperson or of a marketing executive or an advertising executive or a public relations account executive, these are right now very informal and very impressionistic things that are happening. So if we can present to them a system, which in my case is in fact a periodic table, and has 24 elements of influence as described in the book against 7 subclasses and 3 classes, well, that starts to help to focus the attention, the creativity, the resources of what all these spinmeisters and salespeople do.
Right. Yeah. Well, and so that's interesting because I use, most of the work that I do is essentially in organizational influence. So work inside to help employees be better engaged by their managers, executives, etc. I frequently invoke, let's learn from what the best marketers and salespeople do, because they are influence professionals when it comes down to it, or at least they should be if they're any good. And yet, organizational development, organizational change, human resources, they're not necessarily very good at influence. And what I get is I do get a lot of negative language about people in marketing or PR or sales or other disciplines like that, because we've all experienced like the bad used car salesman, for example, right?
That's right.
So do you think part of what you're doing here is to take stigma away and provide foundation? I mean, what is it that the periodic table or the table of influence you have and all these elements, what is it that goes beyond what somebody might...
I think that anybody who walks through Times Square in New York, or anybody who listens to a political speech, of which there are many lately,
right.
Anybody who writes a press release, or, I don't know, listens to a waiter at the restaurant spew out the specials for the day, anybody would have to have the sense that they're always being moved, that somebody or something has a will that they want to bend on them, maybe in a collaborative way, or maybe in a very, very direct and very overt way. But I think we all know instinctively that essentially we're being sold in all sorts of ways all the time. I don't think it's any longer acceptable, given the power of brand, of reputation, of salespeople, of marketers, and so on and so forth. I don't think it's any longer acceptable that we, as in all of us, should have a much better understanding of how this stuff is happening to us.
Right.
It's almost akin to the common person being asked to read a highly legalistic document and truly not being able to understand it. We owe it to ourselves as professionals in these industries of influence to be more transparent about what we do. And I think that while that may seem like a scary thing to do, it also, I think, will help push the industries forward, because we'll then begin to enjoy a common lexicon, common framework by which we can not only pinpoint the nature of what I call the plays being run, but also what to do about them, whether or not to counter them, whether or not to accelerate them, whether or not to hinder them, and so on and so forth.
Right. Ignore them.
Yeah, there's a dual tension, I think. As any set of businesses advance, people are always uncomfortable to sort of illuminate how they do what they do to publish the magic.
Right.
Once you get over that point, though, I think you start to find that there is a whole new and more promising and more interesting discipline to go and pursue. Certainly they found that out in chemistry. Certainly they found that out in biology.
Right.
They found that out in wine. They found that out in weather with things like the Beaufort scale. In marketing, sales, public relations, advertising, we need a system that can do the same for us.
Right. Okay. Well, let's give people an example of what we're talking about. I think I'll save a political example for later because we have a lot of those. But do you have any examples of like recent plays that Apple has been running against Samsung, for example, or Apple and Windows, Microsoft with Microsoft's new store and the Surface tablet? Anything around there?
Well, I think clearly the Surface is an interesting case in a particular strategy, or again, when I say influence strategy, I might use the short term as play. There are two very interesting stratagems at play here within our system that are within the pressing subclass.
Okay.
And it's a relatively high engagement oriented play rather than, say, low engagement. The two plays in question are the crowd and the draft.
Yep.
The crowd is really what you might think of when, AMC's Mad Men came on, the period drama piece. It was very popular.
Sure.
And it was immediately, quote, crowded by a variety of shows. Let's take, for instance, ABC's or maybe CBS's the series Pan Am.
Yep.
Which immediately went off the air. But, and Simon Cowell is running a crowd with his thing called The X Factor. He's trying to crowd his former employer, American Idol.
Right.
I mean, these are pop examples, but what's happening here, to take it down to Microsoft or Apple, is that Microsoft is arguably, quote, crowding, basically the flat tablet, the laptop, the thin, the Ultrabook, whatever.
Right.
They're trying to crowd the market that Apple has pioneered.
Right.
And a crowd in particular, if you go to our system, you can click on that play, and we know quite a lot about that stratagem. The definition is, the slug is to copy to catch up. The definition is the adoption of mimicry or another player's position or idea. Mm-hmm. There are purposes of that play. For instance, you want to match or adopt another player's position. There are pros to that play. For instance, that holds a rival in check, preventing them from running away with a category. There are downsides. There are ways to decode it. There are ways to counter the crowd. There are ways to collaborate with it. And, of course, we've got many examples and synonyms.
Right.
The other play that's at work here is called the draft, which is very, very close to the crowd. But the difference is that a drafter is crowding, but only briefly. They're crowding for the purpose of mimicking and understanding and sapping the leader of its particular energies or resources and waiting for a chance to go around. So it's very much like the peloton in cycling. It's very much like, the drafting and slipstreaming in NASCAR.
Right. Yep.
And so, I think that I might estimate that Microsoft is running a crowd, but there's no doubt that the marketers at Microsoft would tell me that they're actually running a draft.
Sure.
Steve Ballmer would certainly say, no, we're going to catch them and do them one better.
Right.
Well, we'll see. And I don't think they will, because the reason is that Microsoft has a rich legacy of crowding and doing very well at it, and Apple has a very rich legacy of, in fact, looking into categories and breaking them up and breaking them down and doing much better.
Sure.
So we'll see.
Right. Okay.
Pardon the phone.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so I think that is interesting. In the draft, what I think is interesting about the categories, and by the way, playstoRun.com is...
Playmakersystems.com is our website.
Okay, yeah. So for people following along here, Playmakersystems.com, you can take a look at what we're talking about to understand the full range. And there's an iPad app, which we'll talk about shortly as well. What's been interesting, so since the book, which was in 2006, and you launched a revision, version 2 just in August, was it?
Yeah, yep.
Okay.
And that came about on the heels and really with the benefit of 5 years of hard testing in both major universities where we've lectured and taught this system, and at major corporations, the likes of Abbott Pharmaceuticals, Intel, Hewlett-Packard, SAP, Royal Dutch Shell, and others. So we've really banged on it, and we had a lot of insights that we wanted to impart. We saw some weaknesses and some redundancies in the system, and so we spent quite a lot of time on the blackboard board to come up with a second generation. And that sort of fit with the initial credo is when I advanced this general theory of influence strategy in the book, I did say, and I figured that we would find out more.
Right.
I think certainly any biologist knows that there will be new species. Any physicist knows that there will be new chemical elements, and there are every darn day. So that's what we did with System 2.0.
Okay. I think it's interesting. So, most of us, if we're familiar with the periodic table of elements for chemical elements, we're familiar with the structure that we see now, but there were hundreds of versions before that. There were spirals, there were all sorts of really crazy ideas in hindsight. But that's part of what advances a field, if you're going to have a science, is that it's unlikely we're going to find the answer that is the one forevermore table of influence. So it should be expected that it evolves.
Or that others will come along with different methodologies or protocols with different biases, honestly.
Sure.
And they may come up with a color wheel of influence strategies. They may come with a barrel shape. They may come up with a continuum.
Right.
We thought, in fact, long and hard whether or not we had a continuum on our hands, but decided against it. But someone may come up with that key. Either way, I think if you look at the importance, whether it's pop culture or business or politics or government or academia, we're badly in need of a system that helps us to understand these really intangible assets we're trying to manage, like brand, reputation, trust, credibility, and so on and so forth.
Right. Okay. So are there any examples of internal influence, internal to an organization influence strategies that you've participated in or you're aware of people using for, to prep a company for a reorganization and use influence?
Sure. An HR manager could sit down with an employee or even see them at the proverbial drinking fountain, and they might say something like, gosh, that the premiums we're seeing here are really, really problematic. Well, that would be, and if it comes from a vice president of human resources, that could be meaningful, but it's sort of hard to nail down. And there's a name for that play or that influence strategy that they've employed, knowingly or not.
Right.
Because what they have done really is blithely or maybe subtly suggested that there could be a change coming in an employee's benefits or their share of what they pay into for benefits by that statement at the water cooler. So in our system, you then say, well, that's very low engagement. That's probably an assessing play. It probably maybe is in the testing category. And let's see, there's three different options. There's a trial balloon play. There's a ping, which is just our word for that very vague suggestion. And there's another one called a pause, which doesn't really apply here.
Right.
So in the example I just gave, I certainly apologize for that. In the example I just gave, you could determine that the play is either a trial balloon or a ping. Maybe the HR VP is testing an idea, or maybe they're just sort of lightly probing. They're hardly even testing. They want to gauge reaction.
Right.
And this is, I think, the potential beauty of the standard table of influence, what we're describing, and that is that it's a system that can apply to all forms of influence, whether or not they're at a drinking fountain or whether or not they are Donald Trump making a video announcement.
Right. Do you want to talk about that as an example?
Well, sure. Donald Trump came out this week, and he ran a play that we would have to call a bait.
Yeah.
Again, a very right-sided play, or in other words, high engagement play on our table, where he was, in some regards, trying to extort the president for $5 million to his favorite charity. To offer up his college transcripts and applications and things like that. And, Donald Trump might tell you that the play he ran was a peacock, or maybe it was a challenge. Those are different plays in our system.
Right.
But I think if you really look at it and you understand what he was really doing, context does matter a lot here, of course, as you consider your choices.
Right.
Probably he was baiting the president in order to try to bring himself continued celebrity.
Right. And the same day, it was announced that he was fired from Trump Plaza or something. Was that?
I don't know about that.
Okay. He's no longer in charge of one of his properties, is what I took away from that.
Well, he ran too many plays. So.
Yeah. And I agree. I mean, you're obviously much more of a master of this than I am. But the bait, the subtext that I'm reading, the taunt and trap, it's not just bait for no reason. You're trying to provoke a reaction, and in theory, like chess, you should be thinking a couple plays down the line. So what happens if they take the bait? Then you spring the trap on them, right?
That's right. Now, if you're theoretically really using the system and someone employs the bait play against you, you could go to our ontology, whether it's online or whether or not it's with our Play Caller app, and you could hit the counter tab. And if you do that, up comes 4, 5, 6, depends on the play, suggestions for how you might react to it. And, in the case of the bait, there are various. You could say you run a pause if you can't calculate the effects of the bait, or run a mirror, which is an evidentiary sort of play. If your opposition research is good, expose the bait as self-serving. Mm-hmm. What was really interesting is, since the play was directed at the President of the United States, he did take the bait, but he did something fairly novel. He used humor, and he used his appearance on Jay Leno to say something rather funny. He said, well, Donald Trump and I, since growing up together as kids in Kenya and playing soccer, he's always been a bit jealous. He was never really that good. And then when we came to America, I thought that he would have dropped it, blah, blah, blah. So you might argue that the president was using his own preemptive play that ironically, and hope not to confuse our listeners, but ironically, we call a play the Trump, though it's derived more from bridge and the playing of the Trump card than it is from the Donald.
Right.
But that, by the way, is the president's signature play. He's very good at using it because he understands that it's often useful, especially in politics, to run at a problem rather than to run away.
Right.
In this environment where there's so much gotcha politics and gotcha journalism, he realizes that it's better to go ahead and take it straight on. And for that reason, he will use the Trump play when someone mentions Obamacare now. He'll say, oh, Obamacare, yeah, I like that because, you know what, I'm Obama, and you know what, I care.
Right.
Well, that's rather brilliant because it takes the oxygen out of the needling and, and the taunting that is actually coming at you.
Right. Okay. Well, so I think the political examples are interesting because they polarize, right? So somebody falls on either side of the camp typically. What's interesting to me about what you're doing in influence is influence is a fact of life. You can use influence for good or evil or anywhere in between.
No doubt.
And it's not that influence itself. What I realized several years ago, shortly before I found your book, because I was really intently studying this because I realized I did not have a scientific way to do influence, was that I need to know, as you hinted earlier, I want to know when I'm being influenced and be aware of that and be much more effective in influencing, whether it's when I'm doing consulting work, when I'm doing workshops, as a parent, as a person in my community. I want to be as effective as possible, hopefully in a not self-serving way, or at least not entirely self-serving, but to help advance something purposely rather than sort of accidentally. So
that's right. Yeah. There's some very good work done by a retired scholar named James Grunig out of the University of Maryland, who advanced what he calls an edifice or a general theory of effective public relations and communications. And to make a long story short, on what is a 1,000-word treatise, 1,000-page treatise, what Grunig is getting at is that it is most effective and probably it is most right-minded and correct if persuaders, if you will, are thinking in terms of two-way dialogue, which is symmetric, not one-way or asymmetric. Mm-hmm. In other words, dialogue or influence or motive, which is truly considerate and truly collaborative. Okay. And Jim, who in fact I'm going to be speaking with today in sort of a Q&A sort of interview where we're going to be trading viewpoints on our theories, he has some worry about the system that I've advanced because clearly it promotes, or it not it promotes, but it exposes or makes light of strategies that are absolutely, in some cases, like the bait, that are one way and self-serving or self-indulgent, or the peacock, which is clearly a self-indulgent play thanks to the likes of Donald Trump.
Right.
And so I think there's a certain constituency of people in the business, particularly in scholarship, who are a little bit worried about having to surface or so fully describe persuaders do because there is clearly a very unflattering side to the business or the science of influence.
Right, the spin masters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. We're going to run out of time here shortly, so I did want to talk briefly about you launched an iPad app, and you have a website now, a subscription service where people can look this up online. So how did that come about, and where do you see that going?
Once we produced System 2.0, this last year, we realized that we had a system that we were very, very confident in. It reflected so much testing with major executives, with major academics, that we felt that, and looking at all the tools and the ways in which, systems are projected now, it seemed like sort of an obvious thing to do an app, to make an app for that.
Right.
And so we went through the sort of birth canal of that experience, and it produced for iPhones and iPads a brand new app called Playcaller, which is basically the ultimate decision tool for mobile influencers. It allows somebody in the field, whether it's a sales agent or a public relations person or a politician, to quickly consult this mobile decision system and in 3 taps figure out the play that's being run on them, by them, with them, for them, and then in 1 more tap, what to do about it. In other words, to be presented with the options for how to counter or how to complement that particular play. And then if you're savvy to social media, you can share the chosen play over Facebook or via Twitter. Or if you're in a proprietary situation, you can share it via email to a colleague.
Right.
But we think it's sort of the tip of the iceberg, if you will, for decision systems in influence, because now that we have a stable ontology, there's all sorts of fun we can have.
Yes.
We can create decision apps. We can create mapping apps. We can create a signature strategy creation app, so you can create kind of a competitive dossiers on particular people and how they play or how they influence.
Right.
We could go on and on. It's very exciting.
Right. Right. And, as I hinted to you earlier, I'm extremely interested in that because that's right in my wheelhouse. So we will have to follow up on that.
Absolutely.
Okay. So to wrap up, I like to leave people with things that they can, hopefully this is interesting to them, and hopefully they've learned something about, why should they care about influence. If people are at a point where they're like, I have no idea what I'm doing with influence and I'd like to know how to do more, what's one thing that they could do to step out of assuming that it's black magic and some sort of art that they don't have access to, and go forward?
How could they better understand influence?
Yes.
Well, you're throwing me a very slow pitch, so I have to swing at it. I think the simplest thing they could do is to go to our website at playmakersystems.com and check out the table. It's very easy, and anybody can look at it. And while there may be 24 plays that present you initially with the idea like, 24, undoubtedly anybody from my mother to the President of the United States will see 2, 3, 4, or 5 of them that they automatically recognize. The other thing that they could do if they're really into apps is simply go into App Store, at least for now, and download Playcaller. The free version is got a lot on it, and if they want to know all of it, they can pay $4.99 and get the Playmaker Pro version. And what's beautiful about the Playcaller app is it has a call-a-play tool. It takes you through a quick diagnostic. If you have really, as you say, no idea, it'll say, well, okay, what's your temperature? Well, okay, then do you have the aches and pains? What's okay? Are you coughing? And it takes you through like a doctor would,
Sure.
very, very quickly through a process that'll help you understand the play that is afoot, whether or not it's something that's happening to you or maybe something that you're considering.
Right. Okay, great. Yeah, and I also found that it's the plays of the day. Is that play of the day?
Yeah, that's one of our sort of micro blogs that we host on our website at playmakersystems.com. That's always a fun one to follow. It also is automatically populated onto the Playcaller app. So, if you're into calendars like that and you wanted to have something new to think about every day, we're always there to tell you about a play that's just been run.
Right.
In business, pop culture, or politics.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, I think seeing those examples is very useful. That's where I learn the most, is seeing examples often from other industries, and then see how I might be able to apply that in other situations. So I love that aspect. So please keep that up.
Thank you very much. Good feedback.
Okay, great. Well, so let's wrap up. I mean, to me, we're in the golden age, or we just came out of the dark age of influence, and we have some flashlights now. We have a map. We have some better sense of where we're going, or at least some people, folks like you who are leading the way, so that we can see what's going on. I think for all of us, as you mentioned as well, we need to know more about how influence works, how it's being run against us, how we're doing it, how we can be more effective. Between your work, and I'm a huge fan, as I mentioned to you, of Dr. Robert Cialdini, who's the godfather of influence, been studying psychology, sociology for 35 years or so. I finally got around to doing his workshop beginning of last year. It was fantastic, best workshop I've ever done. The work that you're doing has certainly enlightened me and keeps me thinking about what's actually going on in any situation that I'm in. It's a pretty exciting time. We could always talk forever and ever, and I believe we will be talking further, Alan.
I think so.
Yeah. But, I'm glad we actually aligned our schedules and we were able to do this interview despite some technical issues that we both had. But I really appreciate your time and all the work that you've done. So thank you very much.
I appreciate so much your interest and the opportunity to do this. Let's spread the word and keep talking about influence.
All right. And for people who want to find out more, again, about Alan, go to playmakersystems.com. Thanks again.
Thank you.
You've been listening to IAM Talking, an ongoing interview-based series by Information Architected in Cambridge, Massachusetts, hosted by Dan Keldsen, Chief Innovation Officer at Information Architected. Thanks for taking the time to listen to this interview. And if the topics discussed today are of interest to you, please comment on this post at informationarchitected.com. Contact us at info@informationarchitected.com or call toll-free at 855-GO-INNOVATE. That's 855-464-6668. And we can discuss the ways our consulting, speaking and workshop services can help you and your team in your business. Till next time, what is your information architected for?